Are there two Vance Crowes anywhere? Do you have a body double?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Vance Crowe Institute. Good to have you here. The last time you were here, you were super popular. You were one of our most popular guests, according to people who chimed in on the show. Our marketing coordinator's like, damn, that guy's interesting.
I think it's just because we got in a fight with Tabitha here.
Tabitha tried to offend you. She
I didn't try to offend him. I would never do that.
So Vance Crowe's Institute. Remind everybody a little bit about what you do with Legacy Interviews, your background, and of course, what's going on with your podcast before we get into Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I run a company called Legacy Interviews where I sit down with individuals and couples to record their life stories so that future generations have the opportunity to know their family history. And so I've been doing this for about 2.5 years now. And before that, I was working for Monsanto, where I traveled around the country, really all over the Western English-speaking world, talking with people that had a lot of concerns about things like GMOs and pesticides, and just hearing what their questions were and answering that. So the podcast was something I started because if you're going to go out and talk with people about all different kinds of ideas, if you're going to be giving talks, you need to be around people that think differently than you. So I have a podcast where I bring people on that have all different ways of thinking about things. And we have a long, hour and a half, 2-hour conversation about whatever they know a lot about.
And that's Vance Crowe. So you jump in with this from a financial standpoint. You and I were talking about bringing you back in. One thing that is talked about so often and has been for years now is Bitcoin, but people may know about it. People may not know about it. Tabitha, did you ever buy any Bitcoin?
I have Bitcoin. I was heavily invested into all of, as a matter of fact, I have a little bit of all the cryptos. Now, I lost a lot of my crypto when some of the different vendors folded.
Oh, no.
And took all my money with them. And I forgot the password to my Atomic wallet. I will one day figure it out. But
not your keys, not your coin, they say. So if you keep it on an exchange and those guys go away, then it's gone.
It's gone. And people warned me back then. They said, don't leave it. I have some on Uphold. Uphold is still there. I can't remember right now where I had most of it. It started with a V. But anyway, they folded and took all my crypto with them. I am still for crypto. I really am. But I think people need to know the ins and outs, and they need to talk to someone, and they need to know what the risks are, and they need to know where to store their money. And I knew these things. I just was stubborn and didn't do it.
Well, it takes time. We've kind of gotten into this world where we expect our banking to be free. We want them to give us free checking. We want them to make it accessible. If I lose my password, I want to be able to call them up and have them give it back to me. But in truth, right? Your money is really it's a representation of the value you've put out into the world that you've been able to create. And when you store that, if somebody's giving you the ability to store your money for free, it's because you are actually giving them something of value. You're giving them your money to do what they want. And if you treat it irresponsibly, it can go away. If you leave that money on an exchange, it can go away. And one of the beautiful things I think about Bitcoin specifically is that it forces you to really grapple with, I am responsible for this. There is nobody else out there that can handle this but me. And the only way to handle it responsibly is to learn about it. And that takes time and it's hard. But if you can get past that, then you get to a point where you now become uncancelable. Your money becomes uncancelable. You can't have a group or a bank or a credit card company decide you're not allowed to buy these things. You can spend your money however you want. And that's why I think one of the reasons why I think Bitcoin is so powerful.
Can you please explain, Vance Crowe, what exactly Bitcoin is for people who've never heard of it, for just of a dumbing down? There are people who get it. And then, of course, where you sit with it and why you've gotten into it.
Yeah, so Bitcoin is a digital currency, and I distinguish Bitcoin from all other cryptocurrencies because there's only one Bitcoin. And I say that because Bitcoin had this very interesting property that it was born from what they call the Immaculate Conception, right? There was a guy that named Satoshi Nakamoto who put a paper out that described, hey, we could do this digital currency. We could set this thing up. And he just allowed people, whoever wanted to take a little bit of their computing power and start generating Bitcoin. All the other cryptos that you see out there, a group of people got together and they're like, we're going to start this coin and we're going to do an airdrop, or we're going to have a certain amount already allocated to us. And then we're going to sell it to other people. And it becomes a security at that point. It becomes just like something on the stock market. Bitcoin didn't have that. If you knew about it early, you could start mining it early, and you could get in on it. And that makes it so it's something very, very different. It's not the stock that some group of people can change or people can alter. It's something that is basically trust through knowing that the computer code can't be altered.
With that being said, we get comments. For example, Aaron says, I fail to see how crypto or any other non-tangibly backed currency isn't subject to the same problem with our fake promissory notes that we call cash. The end of the gold standard ruined my real value of any money, period.
I mean, I think that Bitcoin is actually a return to a form of the gold standard. So one of the things that's really interesting about Bitcoin is there will only ever be 21 million of them. And it turns out 98% of them have already been mined. So all the ones that you're hearing about being mined now, there's only a little bit left. Now that little bit left will go on for a very, very long time. But unlike the government, who at any time can either print money or they can issue more debt or they can do all these sorts of card games, you can't do that in Bitcoin. The beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that it is digital scarcity. Now, this is kind of like an interesting idea, because if you think about it, if we send that photo that you had of the Tom Cruise and the body doubles, right, that can be copied infinitely. If you have your will and you put it in an email, that can be copied infinitely. You can just make infinite copies. It costs you nothing to do it. What Bitcoin did was it created something that is online, digital, but it cannot be copied, because there's a way to authenticate it so that there is only that one Bitcoin that you're talking about. And so by creating digital scarcity, they created like an eighth wonder of the world. They created a system in which everyone benefits from not allowing this thing to be broken, and that it can't be copied. And unlike the US dollar or any other, government-backed currency in the world, they can go make dollars infinitely. You can't do that with Bitcoin. So that's what makes it like gold.
Why would you choose Bitcoin over Ethereum?
Well, I think that the first one is Ethereum is run by a group of people.
And Ethereum is a crypto for people who don't know.
That's right. So Ethereum is a crypto that came out a few years after Bitcoin. And in my opinion, the problem with Ethereum is that they don't have what's called proof of work. So proof of work is you hear about all these miners and all this electricity that is being done to ensure that there are no more than 21 million Bitcoin, and nobody can just decide, hey, let's change the rules. Ethereum is run by a small group of people, and they actually had a situation where somebody made a trade that they didn't like, and so they went and reversed it.
Right.
Meaning they have the power to change it, which is just like a government.
Right.
And Bitcoin, you can't do that. You have to have
Correct.
51% of the miners in order to be able to do that. And so Bitcoin is special in that way, that there's not some group of people that like put it together and run it. Bitcoin is run by all of the people that are adding compute power, that mining.
And with Bitcoin, while the value has gone up and down, it has always maintained value. I first bought Bitcoin when it was 6 cents. It was like 0.06 cents.
Wow.
I think I bought $75 worth. My son begged me to do it, and I thought it was like the dumbest thing ever. But I bought it. Now, I spent some of it because back then you could play Facebook games with your Bitcoin. and so I used some of it on stupid Facebook games. But I still had I think $16.75 left. And then I just left it there because I didn't think it had a use. And if I ever remember my password, I'll probably have a lot of Bitcoin money. But it just think about that back then, 6 cents. 0.06 cents, and then it has gone up and gone up, and look where is it at now? Like 20,000. I haven't even looked at it in a couple months. I don't even know where it's at today.
It bounces between 26 and 29,000.
But at one point it was up over 60,000.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and what I always tell people though is if you really want to think about Bitcoin, don't think about its price right now. Think about it as one Bitcoin doesn't equal $27,000. One Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin.
Correct.
Because imagine the future in which we've continued to inflate our money, and that the dollar, what it buys you. I was just in the store the other day, and I looked at a little Kit Kat bar, right? It was $2.25. Now, when I was growing up, that was 50 cents. What was it when you were growing up?
No comment.
25 cents.
25 cents, right?
cents.
Right, and the Kit Kat hasn't gotten that much better. It's certainly not bigger, right?
It's smaller.
Yes.
That's all a reflection of the fact that our dollars buy us less.
If somebody were to offer you right
39%
now,
less.
Vance, I'll give you $1,000 cash or I'll give you one Bitcoin. What would you
Oh,
take
come
right
on.
now?
One Bitcoin.
But most Americans don't get that.
Oh,
At least in my humble opinion.
You think so?
Yes.
I think people are catching on, especially when Bitcoin, there's so many, some people don't realize how many cryptos are there out there. I mean, there might be thousands. I know there's hundreds. I probably own hundreds of different types of cryptos, but some of them are like pyramid schemes. And then you have some of them. That's why so many people lost their money in crypto. But at the same time, there's Bitcoin, which has been very stable all along. I mean, it like I said, it's wavered, it's come up and down. And now you have ATM machines for Bitcoin. You can buy products online with Bitcoin. It is actually something you can tangibly use as well.
And you're open for comments, right? And questions.
Oh,
because
anything. Yeah,
we're getting,
yeah.
and you can go ahead and respond what you were going to say to
What I was going to say is that there's some really interesting back ideas about Bitcoin that I think, like, your listeners of this show, I listen to your show all the time, so I kind of have a sense for what you guys talk about. People are always saying, "Oh, Bitcoin is not that green. It's not, it's not environmentally friendly, and that's why we should get rid of it." It turns out Bitcoin, because of the way it is structured, is actually improving our electrical grid. You guys remember when
this is fascinating.
When Texas had those ice storms and then they tried to bring on their electricity, they couldn't handle all the load, right? They're moving them around. Well, after that happened, Texas was like, how can we solve this problem? We can never have this again. And what they decided to do was, let's invite as many Bitcoin miners as we can in. And what we'll do is we'll build the electrical plants to be able to give that they can buy as much electricity as they want. Then when we have a big storm and a bunch of power goes offline, then we'll turn off those Bitcoin miners and we'll turn it on towards the people that need it in their homes. And so you now have like a much stronger electrical grid, because you can't build capacity for the electrical grid and not use it. And so you have this like interesting thing happen. You're finding that places in like Alberta, or places where there's oil wells where they have to flare the natural gas off the top of the well because there's nothing you can do with it. They won't let you build pipelines to transport that natural gas. So what people are doing is they're building Bitcoin miners to go way up in the cold of Alberta or way out in the middle of the sun in Oklahoma. And they're grabbing that natural gas that was being burned, and they're actually turning it into a generator. They're making the generator run, and then they're plugging a Bitcoin miner into it.
It makes sense. It might not make sense to everyone. It makes sense to me. But, I've heard about these systems where people, obviously it does use a lot of power in your home. It creates a lot of heat. But there are people I have heard, and I don't know if it's true, who are having Bitcoin miners, and they're using it to heat their entire home and provide energy for their home. I don't know how they're doing it, but I've been hearing about this.
You certainly could. So a miner, they produce a ton of heat, right?
Yeah.
They're running. What a miner is a computer that the only thing it does is it does two things. It says, do I agree with every other miner all over the world that every single Bitcoin is exactly where we think it is? So you have a wallet, and that wallet says where the Bitcoin are. And the miner is designed to say, do you agree let's say there's 100 million wallets out there, do I agree with every other miner that the wallets have the same amount of money in it? Because that's valuable, because then nobody can counterfeit it. And then the other thing they do is they submit guesses to try and get more Bitcoin. So you hear about this, like you're mining for Bitcoin,
tiny little bits at a time.
And so in order to do this, you're using a computer that doesn't even have a graphical interface. You can't like look at anybody. There's no cameras. There's nothing on it. All it does all day is synchronize to say, do you agree where the Bitcoin are at? And we're going to submit guesses to get more Bitcoin. But they do it hyper. Like, this is like turning a jet engine on this thing. And so they produce a ton of heat. And you can take that heat and you can pump it into your house.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is fascinating.
They've had drug raids. Have you heard that they've had drug raids on homes? Because you know how they have they have the airplanes that fly over, and they're looking for grow houses, and they've raided houses, and it turns out to be Bitcoin miners.
That's hilarious.
Wow.
I didn't know that.
These may sound like some very remedial questions because you are astute when it comes to Bitcoin, but some basic questions. How do you know how much has been mined, and how do you really stop whoever they is from mining more?
So these are not remedial questions. In fact, these are very complicated questions. And so what I'll try and do is answer it as best I can, but it's just like everything else. Like, I can kind of tell you how my car runs, but when you start opening up the transmission, I don't know exactly like all the details. And that's because this is a very complicated system. So people should not feel bad about asking these questions. So the way that you know that there's only 21 million Bitcoin is that the code is written so that no matter how many miners you add in putting those guesses in, they always want those Bitcoin to come out about every 10 minutes. And so what happens is they can turn that question, this is very complicated, they can turn that question is to be able to guess that number, and they can make it harder and harder and harder to guess. And so what they do is every 2 weeks, they say, oh, there's been a ton of miners. China added on, let's say, 10 million miners. So that's going to make it way easier for them to guess. Well, the computer system automatically readjusts and says, we're going to make this question a lot harder to get. And so now we're back to the questions that they ask can only be answered every 10 minutes. And then the 21 million is it's just written into the code. It's the way that the code is structured. And it says if somebody tries to put 21 million and one Bitcoin in, well, then you are not like all the other miners. So you are knocked out of the system.
And it's not as easy as it used to be. It used to be very easy to buy a miner and gain Bitcoin. Now it's extremely difficult. I don't even think it would be wise for a person to even try to mine Bitcoin at their home operation like they used to do. I think you're going to end up using more electricity than what you'll ever gain.
That's
in
interesting
Bitcoin.
to me to hear that.
So there's two factors. You know a lot about this. I'm impressed. The first one is how fast is your miner? So there are people that they are making actually silicon chips that the only thing it can do is mine, and you can make those things faster and faster.
And to dumb it down for our listeners, a mining is a computer system.
It's just a computer. Just imagine.
And you can go up to Best Buy or somewhere and build your own. Or Micro Center.
You could. At this point, it would probably not be technologically that good. But to your point, the problem is electricity costs. So in the state of Missouri, about a kilowatt of energy costs about 11 cents.
I've been told it's like a hot tub.
Yeah. and then during the summer, it becomes more expensive because more people want more energy. So during the winter, it's about 11 cents. Well, it depends on the price of Bitcoin, but if it costs you more than 11 cents worth of energy to get the mining operation going, you can lose money that way. So what people are trying to do is they're saying, where is there energy in the United States that's the cheapest?
Right.
And one of the places they're going is to all these Rust Belt places where there was a bunch of electricity built for GM to build cars or for mining operations in West Virginia. And they have all these substations. So people are trying to go to where is the energy cost the lowest, and we're going to build them there. At this point, it's like break even if you buy a miner and you know.
At one point, I was going to do my own Bitcoin mining, and it was just right at that turning point a couple years ago where it was right on the ledge. If you spent $10,000 and bought a really good miner, you might get a few cents ahead. And then of course in the heat and that it generates, it just wasn't profitable to me. But I was for a while part of a bit mining pool. And so that is one way I think that the average person can get in without buying the equipment. You can join a bit mining pool.
Yeah, which that means you're putting money up and you're saying, hey, you've got a server farm and we'll turn those servers into miners. And then every week or so, send me the percentage that I gave you money for those miners. It's a decent way to do it. The interesting thing, the reason people mine is because more and more we're watching places like Coinbase and Binance and all of these companies get sued by the SEC, who's trying to rein them in. And it's going to be harder and harder and harder to get your money into Bitcoin. And so what people are saying is, well, I'll just trade my dollars to buy electricity that gets me Bitcoin. And that's going to be one way to get it. So who knows how the regulations will play out, but that's why people do it.
When we're talking with Vance Crowe of Legacy Interviews, we had him on as a guest a while back, super popular guest, talking about the ag industry, the food industry, worked with former Monsanto, now Bayer, when it came to pesticides and breaking down what's real, what isn't. Also host podcasts now, very versed on financial matters, as you can hear him talk about Bitcoin today. When you speak of they, what do we really know about Satoshi Nakamoto, who is considered to be the front person, or at least the front name for, and I've never seen a picture of Satoshi Nakamoto, so that's why I say the picture or the name in front of whoever this person is.
So this is where the mystery gets things exciting. So there was a guy, and he published a white paper. Some people actually think it was a group of people that published it under one name, like a pseudonym. And some people think it was just a guy that was very interested in cryptography, which is what kind of undergirds all of this. And he wrote this paper saying, look, we've tried all these other ways of doing digital money. There was a thing called hash cash. There's been a bunch of attempts. And he was like, I think I've got another way to try it. So he puts it out in a forum, and then he says, I'm going to turn this thing on. And he does. He turns it on, and he is mining along with a few other people. Remember that guy that bought a pizza for 10,000 Bitcoin or 100,000 Bitcoin or whatever it was? He was a part of these forums where these are just a bunch of like nerdy guys that are interested in this thing. And then the wallet that he had, the original wallet, he amassed a big amount of money and people, or a big amount of Bitcoin, and people all knew where it was. And then one day, Satoshi just vanished. He just went away. And that wallet that exists has over $1 billion of wealth in it. So sometimes you'll hear people come by and be like, I am Satoshi Nakamoto. I'm the guy that originated this thing. Because, the real one would have to come out of the woodwork and say, no, you're not. It's me. So what people often say is, okay, we'll believe you're Satoshi Nakamoto when you can move a single Satoshi, which is one. It's a very, very small amount of Bitcoin. If you can move just one out of that wallet, and nobody's ever been able to do that.
It's interesting. That's always been so fascinating to me.
It is. Now, if you're just hearing this for the first time, or Bitcoin, it can be a little cumbersome. It can be. And I'm not trying to be negative to people from the standpoint when I say dumbing it down, but we have people who are jumping on going, okay, can you explain this again to me? What exactly is mining? What's the mining process? If you could kind of explain that for
what I think everybody should know is all you're going to be able to get when you first touch Bitcoin is like, okay, I can kind of see it making it out way off in the distance. And so whatever you don't get here, it's just like you have to learn it one at a time. But I'll start off by saying, in order to understand mining, you have to understand, how do you keep a Bitcoin? How do you get one? And so
do you have one with you?
No.
Literally, people on the
Just
chat line
kidding.
are
I actually
asking
do,
that.
actually.
Is it a coin? They want to know, is it literally you can take it out of your pocket? And they really think that.
Well, so I think it's a fair question, right? Because we named it coin, and when we think of coin, we think of something in our pocket. So a Bitcoin is just an allocation. It's like a little number on a screen that says you have this much of it. And then it's nothing more than that. It's
like
all
your
you
bank
can see,
statement.
like your bank statement. But the thing about this Bitcoin is that there's you put it in a wallet. Now, a wallet has two features to it. You have the public address. So this is like your email address. If I wanted to send you a Bitcoin, you would say, hey, here's my Bitcoin public address, which would basically be like your email. So I would type that in. It would be a long string of numbers and letters, and that would be how I would get it to you. Now, if you want to send one to me, then you have to have the second part of that wallet, which is the private key. Private key is just a password. Tabitha said she lost her password. So with those two things, the public address, that's where where everybody can see where the Bitcoin are, and the private key, which only you have, that's what unlocks it. What mining is people are plugging in computers, and the miners are designed to say, do we agree that every one of the Bitcoin that we have set is out here, 21 million of them, and they can be split into really, really, really small amounts, right? Do we agree that there's where yours are, and where yours are? Does everybody agree they're in the exact same spot? And if they don't agree, if some of the miners think they're somewhere else, then you have to decide, well, which one are we going to go with? And what they do is they say, if 51% of the miners think one thing, then that's what you go with. So now, what are the miners? Well, those miners are computers. All they're doing is synchronizing. And why would somebody plug in a miner? Well, because if you plug one in and you add that computing power to say, do I agree where the Bitcoin are? Then you get little bits of Bitcoin in exchange for as much computing power as you put in there. And so the mining and the wallets are tied together in the sense that the miners are saying, do you agree that all of the Bitcoin are where the wallets say they are?
Can we break this down as simple as if somebody wanted to buy Bitcoin today, how much it would cost them to get one Bitcoin?
So that's an interesting question. You can buy a Bitcoin, can be broken out into point, and then imagine 7 zeros and a 1. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. That's what's called a Satoshi. So a Satoshi is the smallest amount of Bitcoin that you can buy. Right now, $1 US dollar will buy you about 3,700 Satoshis. Right? So if you had...
Could you repeat that again?
$1 will buy you 3,700 Satoshi. Because you could look at it and say, well, I need $27,000 to buy one Bitcoin, but you don't actually. A Bitcoin is only just like a number, right? It's just like, oh, that's an amount. But you can buy a very, very small amount of them.
And you said 7 zeros?
Yes, and then a 1.
Because you can go right now and buy, let's say you have $100 and you're like, I just want to put $100 into Bitcoin, you can go and buy $100 worth of Bitcoin.
Exactly.
And then you can continue to buy it and continue to buy it. And, and it'll just continue. And it's going to go up and down and up and down. But, you if you watch it enough, you can see when it goes down. And if you can follow like Wall Street Bets or one of these other groups, and they always give you some good hints and tips about when to buy.
There's no doubt in your mind we're headed digital currency, correct? We're headed to we get into politics and we can talk about I don't think there's any doubt we're going to head to a digital currency, and we see what's happening with our dollar. Your thoughts from that perspective?
Well, so I guess it just depends on what you mean by digital currency.
And educate me, please.
So I think that Bitcoin is the most likely one for that I want to see succeed, because I think it means freedom. I think it frees us from a government that can print money. It frees people in Argentina and Venezuela from dictators that want to, inflate the money. It's very difficult for governments to take Bitcoin away from you. Mm-hmm. There are some people that talk about things like CBDCs and FedCoin, and this would be the opposite of Bitcoin. This would be a total digitization of our financial system. That would be, instead of having dollars in your pocket, you only have like an app on your phone that the Federal Reserve issues you their own kind of cryptocurrency. That is, I think, like a very bad scenario. And the reason it's a very bad scenario is because it hugely amplifies a power that we watched the Canadian government already exert. Remember, the trucker rally is going on. Mm-hmm. There's some people they didn't like. They just shut down their bank accounts, shut down their credit cards, turned off the Patreon accounts that were going on, that were using to send money to people. You don't want to allow any centralized power the ability to do that. And Bitcoin is the opposite of that. With Bitcoin, no one can stop you. If you have your private key and you have access to a computer, you can move that money around anywhere you want. So
Satoshi is untouchable by governments anywhere around the world at this point?
I mean, the government can always get you, right? Like,
and they're trying.
They are.
Right now, the government has been quite friendly to the U.S. government has been friendly to Bitcoin. They viewed it as a commodity and not a security. So these other ones, Ripple, Ethereum, any number of the different other kinds that are out there, those have been viewed as a security, a type of stock. And so that's why the SEC is like, you're not allowed to do this. We regulate the stock market.
They are all over them. Our old friend, Bill Callahan, who was on our old show, a former special agent in charge for the FBI here in the area, his sole job right now is training crypto investigators. And so what they're doing now, they're unleashing all these crypto investigators to make sure that people are not making all of these transactions anonymously, because that is what crypto allows you to do. You can make all of these anonymous transactions because you're just an account. So if you want to go out and you want to make a deal, a transaction, you want to purchase something with Bitcoin, you're completely untraceable.
Well,
or used to be.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like there's like a double-edged sword there, right?
There is.
The to your point, if my name is not attached to my private key, I can send that around and nobody knows about it. But every single Bitcoin is accounted for. We know there's no such thing as like, I have a wallet that I've like buried out in the backyard.
Right.
It's because we know where all the accounts are. And so the government has started to do these things that I think are pretty nefarious, where they start saying, we know where that Bitcoin is because we did these special magical transactions. I don't mean to be so disparaging, but they say like, oh, and we know you sent money to Tabitha and you didn't want us to know because you did it in this special way, but we have a way to reverse engineer it and we know. And then you'd say, if you're defending yourself in court, you'd say, well, how do you know that? And they're like, well, we have a special code that shows us this. And we can't show it to you because that's what allows us to catch the other bad guys. And so people are sitting in jail right now saying like, wait, that's not fair. You can't use evidence against me that I can't look at.
Yeah, why are big banks behind it?
Big banks behind
Bitcoin right now?
I don't think there are very many that are.
Because we had a comment that said the big banks are behind it, and I'm like,
no, that's like the competition. The big banks want to squash crypto.
Okay,
that's my sense. I mean, I think that actually, what I really think is, Bitcoin is being purchased by both banks and governments, and they don't want people to know about it. I think they are trying to buy it as quietly as possible, just like this is where we get kind of conspiratorial. But
that's all right. It's almost Friday, Vance. It's almost Friday.
There has been a huge proliferation of governments around the world buying gold. And this is something that the gold bugs have said for a long time. But there's been a big amount where they've said, "Hey, we need to start backstopping our currency by making sure we have gold." So they're turning their currency, the euro or the Chinese yuan or the Russian ruble, and they're buying gold. I think they are also buying Bitcoin. The government of Bhutan came out and said, you know what? You guys found us out. We've been building all these electrical plants. We've been building all these miners. We are backing we're trying to buy as much Bitcoin as we can. El Salvador, the same thing. So I think if any of these groups are into this, they're not going to tell anybody because they want to buy it as quietly as possible. Because as soon as it becomes known that a large bank or a country is buying it, that's when the price goes and starts shooting up.
Boy, that makes sense. Talking with Vance Crowe about Bitcoin, crypto, where it sits with our finances, our government. Kevin wants to know, Vance, I think the Fed coin is going to be tied to corporate ESG scores. Are you familiar with ESG scores?
Yeah.
We've been talking about that quite a bit here. If they don't comply, they will shut down the corporations or hurt them financially. He believes it's all about government control. Your thoughts?
I mean, I think that whether or not that's what they're setting out to do, that is the power they will have. And so, I think you could be somebody in government that says, "Oh, it's safer. Oh, it's better. Oh, this allows us to do things we've always wanted to do." And then one day they wake up and you're in COVID times and they decide, it's hard to keep people in their houses. It'd be a lot easier if they just didn't have money to spend, right? That'd make it a lot easier to keep them in their houses. And so I think, like with government, I'm generally of the sense that there are not that many coordinated cabals. There are a few, coordinated people that are making things happen. Most of the time they wake up and they realize, we have a power. Why don't we use it? And then they do use it.
Many people are feeling that this is very unsafe. These are the people on the chat line, that they use cash for everything. But what it reminds me of, when our grandparents used to take the cash and put it in our mattress because they really thought that the banks were evil. But the cash actually says it's a promissory note. Couldn't the government just stop accepting cash at places? So is it any safer than cash?
Well, so the thing about it is everybody's making a guess about what will the future look like, right?
Correct.
And I tend to think of Bitcoin as not something you're thinking about right now. You're thinking about the long term. It's like planting a tree and knowing, like, this is going to be something that doesn't grow. I have to protect it for a while before it's valuable. But then one day it provides me shade or fruit or whatever that is. Bitcoin is the same way. Right now, if you get it, it's hard to use, right? Like, there's not very many places that accept it. You also it's not like your iPhone. I mean, your iPhone made getting on the internet really easy. Facebook made, communicating with your friends over the internet a lot easier. So these things were built to make it easier. If you want to get into Bitcoin now, it's a lot easier than it was when Tabitha was first starting, but it's still pretty hard. But if you do get into it, you have a way of protecting your wealth, the things you've earned, in a way that almost nothing else can. The difference between a gold bar and Bitcoin, they're really similar. They're both a finite supply. There's very low inflation, but the difference is, if I want to bring you gold, I got to carry around a gold bar or gold coins, and I got to bring it and give it to you, right? And you got to move it around. With Bitcoin, I can send it to you, and 10 minutes later, you'll know beyond the shadow of a doubt that it's gotten to you. And so I think it will replace those old forms of money, hard forms of money, that are better than those promissory notes. Because those promissory notes, just like monopoly money, if somebody plunks down $10,000 in the center of the board and says, "Oh, we're going to share this now," right? All the property values go up, and the cost of everything. So I think Bitcoin is better than a promissory note by miles and miles.
And don't you think if you start buying Bitcoin now, let's say even if you're throwing in $100 a month on Bitcoin, someday, let's say when it's retirement age, or depending on how old you are, when your kids go to college, I think that the Bitcoin is going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to gain wealth. And, there was a time in this country and others where, like you said, people stockpiled gold, they stockpiled cash, they did this, they did that. Look at the Civil War money. When we had a Civil War, it was worth nothing.
Right.
And eventually our cash is going to be worth nothing. And we have to start thinking about, what is the next thing? How do we build wealth? How do you build generational wealth? And I do think a lot of people are looking at Bitcoin for that answer.
Yeah. And I think, so they call it in our world stacking sats. So a sat is a Satoshi. And so instead of saying, like, "Oh, I've got to go out and get a whole Bitcoin, I got to get $27,000 to go," you're just saying, exactly like Tabitha said, I'm just going to try and get 3,000 sats a week, right? That's $1 worth of sats. But imagine if you do that for 52 weeks, you now have 150,000 Satoshis, which if we think about this over the long term, this is like planting that little tiny seed and letting it grow. And I think the people that get into trouble are the ones that are like, I've invested as much as I can into Bitcoin, and if it doesn't go up, I'm going to need that money and I'm going to have to sell it and I'm going to have all these problems. And instead, what you should do is just be as humble as you can. I'm just doing this little by little by little, which is the way a savings account used to be.
Yeah, it did.
Exactly.
Vance, you have the gift of gab. You're very intellectual. You're an incredible speaker. So could you put this into perspective for somebody? Because it is so difficult, because as humans, what we don't understand or that challenges us sometimes are different from what we've always done. It's uncomfortable, and it can be uncomfortable for me. I started to try to learn about crypto in the past 5-6 months, and kind of went the crypto route, didn't really jump into much of the Bitcoin study. Now I've started to learn more about Bitcoin, and certainly got a great lesson today so far from you. What kind of advice would you give to somebody who says, listen, I'm going to stick with my old money, and this is the comfortable way for me. And, I don't want to look at Bitcoin and try to learn something new.
I had an older man who listens to my podcast. He's probably in his 70s. Call me up one day and say, I really dislike this Bitcoin, but I found in my life that the more I am resistant to something, the more I should go learn about it. And so he wanted to come by. He came by my studio and he said, I want you to help me buy, I think it was like $50 worth of Bitcoin. And so that's what we did. We just went through the process. He found a company. I would recommend something like Swan. I don't use it myself, but like that's the one that on the street. That's good, Swan. And then say, I'm going to buy this Bitcoin, and then I'm going to get a wallet, and I'm going to move the Bitcoin from the exchange to my wallet. And once I've done that, even if it's a really small amount, $10, $20 worth, the amount you will know about Bitcoin after you've done that will make you have a much better gauge as to whether or not this is something that's interesting to you or not. Because if you sit on the sidelines and you say, no, I don't like Bitcoin and I don't think it's going to succeed, but you've never actually dipped your toe into it, you don't understand how it works and how it feels. And I know for me personally, I've been in the world not nearly as long as Tabitha, but every day I try to do something new. I try and learn something about it. And I get that feeling, when you're learning something and something just clicks and you have this like, aha, like it feels so good.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a while to get to that point, though.
And when you get there, though, the payoff is better than almost any other feeling that you have. And that's why I think one of the things Bitcoin can provide is it's like all these aha moments that you'll find yourself being that guy that's like standing in the urinal, turning to the next guy being like, so you ever heard about Bitcoin?
And it can be obsessive. Back when I was really buying all the cryptos, back in 2020, 2021, Dogecoin was a big one. I made a lot of money off Dogecoin. I still have a ton of Dogecoin, but it's like the stock market. There were times where me and my friends, we'd be up all night long watching them go up and watching them go down and try to think, when are you going to sell? Are you going to trade? What are you going to do? And I think it's fascinating. I really think everyone should buy a little bit of everything. I have a little bit of everything. And I think even if you put $20 into some new crypto you've never heard of, at least you have it.
So finally, we found the point where you and I are different.
I know, and I know why, because I've lost a lot of money with my strategy of buying a little bit of everything.
I mean, if what you want to do is to have the feeling of excitement about gambling and like, hey, maybe this will pay off, that's okay.
And it did for a while, but those days are over.
But if what you want to do is to say, I want to be able to pass my children down something. One of the questions I ask people that are financial advisors to come on my podcast, and we start talking about Bitcoin, and almost all of them, not all of them, but almost all of them are like, no, I don't like that. It's going to zero. It's pet rocks. Then I always ask them, like, so do you still teach your grandkids to go open up a savings account? And they're like, oh, yes. And I'm like, well, why? Do you put your money? Is that like a long-term safe thing? Well, no. Why not? Well, because you have to put it in the stock market. Because if you put it into a bank account, to savings account, the inflation rate is going to take away all its value. So the government has set up a system where we can't save anything. We have to risk it. We have to take that money and put it into the stock market. And then we're looking for like, is it going to make big gains or is it just going to hold its value and keep up with inflation? What Bitcoin is a way off that ride. this can't be inflated. So what you can do is actually create something and be like, I'm going to give this to my children. I don't care how much it goes up in my lifetime. I'm going to create something where I've put my value into so that my children can have it.
And before we let you get out of here today, it's something that you've talked about already, but we do have listeners and viewers who come in and out. The main difference between Bitcoin and other crypto, once again, so people get the idea, because if you're investing in the crypto, that's not the same, the crypto like Ripple, XRP, it's not the same as Bitcoin.
Bitcoin, the beauty of it is that it is trustless. There is nobody in control of it. There is code that anyone can go look at, and that it can't be changed when a small group of people comes together and says, hey, we didn't like how that transaction went, or we didn't like that. Whereas all these other ones, somebody is controlling the levers on them.
That's right. And that's how people end up losing money like I did, because it's more of some cryptos are a pyramid scheme.
Most cryptos
most are. And I was just explaining to somebody on the comment line about Dogecoin was a pyramid scheme, but Bitcoin is not that.
And this is something that I found out too, that Robert just brought up, XRP, which can be called Ripple, correct?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
It's backed by metal. So that gives it a little bit more credence, doesn't it?
Well, so, when Ripple first came on the scene, I don't know what it is now, but I remember back in the day when it first came on, they were describing it as like a postage stamp, and they were like, so I don't know what it's done over time. There are some that they say are like stable coins where they're backed by something, and now you're just using a digital version. All of those things, every time I've looked into them, at the end of the chain, there's somebody that says, yes, but there's a committee or a CEO or somebody
that makes sense,
that pushes the button.
That's right.
So you got to, if you're going to go that route, you better know the committee or have connections with the committee. That's for sure. We could talk to you for hours. Vance Crowe, that was the fastest 45 minutes. I think
Man, me too. Yeah.
That we've ever had on here. That's what we did last time. We kept you for like an hour and a half. And that's right. He's got other jobs he's got to go to. We'll continue to get you back on. We made it through 45 minutes without Tabitha insulting you, which was fantastic.
I could talk about, I didn't insult him the last time.
I enjoyed the last time. It was fun. We had a good time.
I could talk about crypto literally all day. I love crypto talk. And no one talks about it.
We still have to get you back on so we can talk food again, because we never got into all the specific topics of food and
we're going to do that again. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be talking about Splenda here shortly.
Oh, I will definitely be listening. Yeah. I don't these kinds of things, artificial sweeteners, they're
very
super
bad.
Curious to me, right?
Very bad.
Yeah.
Not all of them.
Well, just on my podcast this week, I had a guy on that is making a Roomba for chicken eggs. And what he does is he built this like chicken coop. Yeah.
That's a good idea.
This chicken coop, and it like moves around your backyard, and like you put feed in it and water in it, and it like automatically does it. It's solar powered. It charges these batteries, and then they move around.
Wow.
And so you can use it to fertilize your yard.
This is fantastic.
Very
and
good.
remind
Does it
everybody.
clean the chicken poop?
That I think is just getting left behind.
Well, yeah, right now people build those and you have to physically push them around the yard. So this is a really good idea, because I was thinking, how am I going to do that? I'm
And
thinking
this will
about
do it
buying
like a Roomba.
chickens,
Yeah,
so.
she just got a
Got
new
it.
property and she has some land. And hey, once again, before we let you go, how can people view your podcast, connect with you, anything, if they have questions? You name it.
Yeah, so it's the Vance Crowe podcast, and you and I will be on here maybe at the end of the month.
Just
so
let me know.
You're gonna come on, and it's just it's a totally different thing than what this is. You guys are talking about what's going on in the news of the day, and mine is I'm going to find interesting people and hear what do they know about that I would be curious about. So if people want to know more about that, it's the Vance Crowe podcast, and if people are interested in having their loved ones recorded so that you can pass those stories on so that, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren know their family history, then go to legacyinterviews.com.
What a great idea. Vance Crowe, everybody. Thanks again for your time, my friend. We
Loved
appreciate it.
This is great.